Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'm Danny Smith, Executive Vice President and co-owner of Color ID, one of the world's leading integrators of advanced identity solutions. Welcome to Color ID's Campus Forum series, continuing the conversation. Today's session is titled ID Printer Report and is the third session of the five-part third forum series. The third forum sessions will generally last 60 minutes and run live each Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Please feel free to invite colleagues from your institution or your company or anyone you know across the identity industry who would benefit from participating in the Campus Forum series. A registration link is located on our website at colorid.com, and there you'll find the drop-down titled Webinars. At the beginning of today's session, there will be a Menti poll to learn more about the common challenges you, the audience, are now experiencing. It's simple to do. Just open a browser on a PC or mobile, go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and then type in a 6-digit code on your screen. We'll give you the code and explain more during the presentation. You know, it's really been nice to be able to develop such meaningful relationships over the past 20 years, and we're incredibly grateful that we can come together and stay connected. Once again, we have a large group of identity industry attendees joining us today. So as we say, whoever you are and wherever you may be, we welcome you. We hope that you find the investment of your time of great value and encourage you to be interactive in these sessions. Leading today's technical discussion will be David Stallsmith, Director of Product Management for Color ID. David brings a wealth of technical information from over 14 years of working with advanced identity solutions. Of course, many of you know and have worked with David over the years as he closely works with manufacturers, vendors, and end users to promote understanding of the complicated products and services that comprise our identification industry. He's contributed to the decision-making process at many universities, healthcare facilities, and government agencies as they have considered acquiring contactless, smart card, mobile ID, and biometric systems. Since 2006, David has presented annually at the NACU conference, and he's also presented at NACUS's annual and leadership conferences, the European and Canadian Campus Card Users Conferences, and full-day identity summits hosted by some of the most prominent universities in North America. Joining David on today's session as moderator is Mark Deegan, Color ID's Corporate Marketing Manager. In addition to managing Color ID's marketing department for the past 16 years, Mark also juggles the duties of account representative for some of our most strategic partners, both customer and corporate. He is also project manager for Color ID's banking-related customers. David and Mark's technical knowledge concerning advanced identity solutions is a testament to their commitment to our industry and a great example of the value differential Color ID employees bring to our customer and our corporate partner relationships. Now, just a few housekeeping items and we'll get started. Again, we're really encouraging these sessions to be as interactive as possible, so please utilize the question box to submit questions. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation during the Q&A period. In addition to asking questions, there will also be live polls throughout the presentations, so please be sure to participate in those and be as prompt as possible. Also, please note that Color ID's entire education team is listening in on today's session and are available for questions or follow-up discussions. Just call or shoot your account manager an email. And reminder that everyone who completes the 5-session forum will receive a certificate of completion and a Color ID swag bag filled with some nice items. Color ID can confirm everyone's attendance, so you don't have to do anything regarding that. However, each session does require separate registration, so please make sure you're registered for all those future sessions. Once again, thank you everybody for your privilege of your time and allowing us to come together today and stay connected. I'm going to turn this over to Mark and David to get started. David?
Thanks, Danny, and sorry to jump that in a little sooner than you probably expected. But everyone, welcome to our webinar today. We're glad that you're here to continue the conversation. Today, we're going to talk about ID printers, and hopefully this will be like a walk around the showroom. We'll talk about printer basics, and of course, our warning is that everything you hear is our opinion, Color ID opinion throughout. We'll talk about encoder mysteries, and we'll talk about some new stuff in the ID printer world. But before we get into that, let's go to a poll. Mark?
Thanks, David. Hello, everybody. So let's kick it off with the Menti poll. Please travel to www.menti.com. It's going to request you to input a code. That code is 11 343. And once you input that, we're going to ask you this question. My ID printers are like what? So we should have some interesting feedback once you guys start inputting these content. We'll start seeing the words fly up on the screen, and we'll see what you guys think. There we go. We got some coming in. Unreliable, slow, old, temperamental. Yes, I've heard that before. That's a good one. Hard to get replaced. Yes. Okay. Somebody else said old as well. So the bigger the word on the screen, that means that other folks have said the same exact thing. So it looks like consensus here is temperamental and old. Sounds like my 13-year-old lab at the moment. I think she's sick and tired of me hanging out all the time during this COVID-19 stay-at-home order. So, okay, I think that's probably enough of the Menti. We might have a couple more, but that looks good. So, Dave, there's a wide range of responses there. Pretty cool to start that off. So we're going to have some other polls as we go through the presentation, and I will handle those accordingly. If you guys have any questions during, shoot me on the chat line, and I'll help you out there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark. And thanks, everyone, for participating. Nice to see what everybody's thinking about ID printers here at the top. And it's not all positive, but, you know, it's like family members. You know, they're just there. Let's talk a little bit about printer basics. So there are essentially two kinds of ID card printers, and one is direct to card and the other is reverse transfer. So talking about direct to card printing first, this picture here is a printhead from a direct to card printer, and on the bottom of that assembly is a glass feature with tiny little pixels in it that are activated and heated by the board above it, about 300 DPI dots per inch, or on some of these 600 DPI. But that printhead is in place above the ribbon, which has the die that is the color that will go into the card, and then below that is the card. So printhead, film, or ribbon, and then card. And as the printhead heats various areas as the card moves along underneath the film, it or the other way around, but the printhead heat forces the die to turn into a gas, and it's forced down into the surface of the card. So it creates quite a sturdy type of color. It's not just something sitting on top of the card that can flake off. It's actually color infused into the surface of the card. So that's why it's called die sublimation. The die is infused as a gas, and versus the quick reverse transfer process, which I'll describe in a minute, this is usually a little quicker, and usually the printers and the supplies are less expensive. So in reverse transfer printer, the same die sublimation process is used, but instead of printing directly onto the surface of the card, the images are printed onto the back of a thin, clear film, and then the film itself is applied to the surface of the card. So when the printing is done, you have both the protection of that extra layer of plastic film on top of the printing, and then also it's harder to change the surface of the card because it's under that plastic. So it gives you both a physical protection and a bit more security. Also, if there's any irregularity in the surface of the card, then the film lays over that, and there are no holes in the color of your print job, for example. So versus direct to card, it is usually better image quality. This is the one that can often be up to 600 DPI. It does take a little bit longer to print because there's an extra process. It does add some security, and the printers and the supplies do cost a little bit more. So some advantages and some disadvantages. When you order your printer, you may order some other add-ons, and the lamination unit is a big one. That adds a layer of plastic over whatever you put on your card, whether it was a direct-to-card print or a reverse transfer image. The lamination is another piece of plastic that goes on top of that. It provides UV protection so that the colors are less likely to fade over time. And it also provides more physical protection, especially if you have mag stripes and you're swiping your cards regularly through mag encoder or mag stripe readers. You know that those readers are quite abrasive on the surface of the card. Lamination helps protect that. Another, obviously, dual-sided modules. Some printers are natively dual-side, but many you have to order the flipper module separately. And the reason is because the print and the ribbon are all aligned to just work on one side of the card at a time. So if you need to print on the back, then you have to flip the card over and run it back through the card path. Also, mag stripe encoding can be added to a printer, but only one. There are no printers that I know of that have two mag encoders, and so for schools that do have two mag stripes, they have to run their cards through another process to encode their mag stripes, either a manual process at the desk, or perhaps they provide numbers to the card manufacturer, and that second stripe is pre-encoded with mag stripe data. Or the third way it's often done is that cards are run through the regular process, mag encoded, the first stripe is encoded, then they have to run the card through a second process to encode the second mag stripe. So a lot, it's just, there can only be one encoder in the card and it only catches one edge of the card. So you have to, at the very least, take the card out, turn it around and run it through again. If you have a contactless or contact chip in your card and you want to either read that or write something to that chip, then you need a contactless smart card encoder. There's also a card flattener, because especially the reverse transfer printers, which use more heat and are having hot things in contact with the surface of the card longer while the card's in the printer, can sometimes cause the cards to bow. And then DataCard added this interesting feature a couple years ago. They call tactile impression, and you get a die. It can be custom made with your logo or any design you want. And after the card is printed, it actually heats up that die and presses it into the surface of the card so that it leaves dents in your image there that you can feel tactile. So kind of a cool additional security feature. The lamination I described before, you can laminate single side or dual side. If you really care about the front or back of your card or both, then you can put laminate film over both. So a lot of times it's not unusual on the back to leave the mag stripe uncovered, and so maybe only half of the card is covered with lam on the back. The lamination is thicker than the reverse transfer film. Sometimes people go to reverse transfer and they say, well, we already have the reverse transfer layer over our printing. Do we need lamination? And if your cards are going to last for a while and be subjected to a lot of abrasion, yeah, then you could use that extra over laminate process. Lamination is available with a liner or linerless. The liner method has been around for a long time, and that is where the lamination material is actually a patch, the side a little bit smaller than the card, and it's stuck onto a web, a piece of film, whatever you want to call it, and each patch is pulled essentially by the printer, pulled off of that film and attached to the surface of the card. So when you're done, you have a roll of film without the patches on it. Linerless lam was a newer process invented a long time ago by a guy in Connecticut that we met, and it was introduced on a Zebra printer, and now some other manufacturers also have linerless printing, and now there is no web, no film behind the patch. The plastic ribbon is itself the whole patch. So you put that on the card, it gets cut off, and then the next card comes through, and when you're done, there is no take-up roll of lam film left over, which is kind of cool. It does provide security and protection, and often custom holograms are built into the over lamination. And the reason that this is effective, first of all, it requires very expensive machinery to put these holograms into the laminate material. Here are just an example of a number of different types of hologram and other things like microtext that can be added. But the holograms themselves, the die is created, which puts that hologram into the film. And if it's custom, it's your logo, it's whatever image you want, but it takes hours and hours of a very painstaking laser process to cut the die that will then be used to make these holograms. So once that die, that's why it's a pretty substantial fee to get that die made. Once it's made, then you can order holograms from that company. Only a few companies in the world offer this for card hologram to over laminates. So it's just by nature of being expensive and difficult, adds security. So let's go to this next poll, Mark. 2 parts.
All right, guys. So we got a 2-part poll. The first part is, what ID printer do you use? So if you see the make and model that you guys are using today, select it. If you don't, then just hold off. I'll share that here in a second. So. Alrighty. And share this first one. So 58% are utilizing an interest data card printer, one of their direct card lines. So it could be the SD460, 360, or the old school SP75. 25% of you are saying a other printer that we'll check out next. And then we got a tie at 8% with HID direct to card. That would be their 4500, their 1500, or the 5500 LMX, as well as the reverse transfer printers, the HTP 5000 or the 5600. So let's see part 2 for those that said other. Quite possible that you guys may not be seeing your other printer in here, so we'll see what we get. I'll give it just a moment. Okay. Thank you all for taking part in that. We had someone utilizing a Zebra's direct-to-card line. That's the ZXP7. And then we still had 50% utilizing a reverse transfer from the makes of either NISCA, MAGICARD, JVC. That's kind of like the OEM manufacturer of those guys these days. So awesome. Thank you all very much for participating in that poll. I'll catch you on the next one.
Great, thanks, Mark. And the reason we had to do 2 polls is because GoToWebinar only offers 5 options for answers, and we thought there are way more printers than that, and we wanted to give everybody a chance to get at least close to what you're using in the poll. So we're now going to talk about DataCard, because DataCard has been, as everyone knows, kind of the industry standard for higher ed card printing for a long time. And I use this paraphrase of the president of GM, what's good for America is good for GM. Well, for higher ed, that corollary has been DataCard printers, now known as Entrust DataCard. Since Entrust bought DataCard, it's now EDC, but their direct-to-card printers have been rock solid. That SP75 that Mark mentioned, it's old school, but that SP75 has printed a lot of university IDs over the years, and we've heard lots of love-hate talk about those things. The favorite was somebody get it and they put the laminate in backwards, and then all of a sudden it fused the printer into an immovable mass. But overall, I think it was quite a successful printer. The SD460 has been a pretty good successor to it. It is still going strong. DataCard has a funny business model where they also put this in gray and black plastic, and they call it a CD 800, but it's essentially the same printer. And it has, obviously the SD360 on top, the 2-sided printer, and below is the LAM unit, but you can only buy it that way, but you all know that. So this has been a really good printer, and there's talk of another printer to follow, but so far we haven't seen it. What we have seen is the CR805. This is DataCard's newest printer, and you would think this is where everyone would move after the 460. if you were in the data card family and you wanted to stay in that direction and get the next best thing. And it offers a lot of exciting features. It is reverse transfer instead of direct to card. It uses pigment ink, which showing here in the bottom left sits on the surface of the card rather than how it shows the dye sublimation on the right, kind of weakly dissolving into the surface of the card. Well, obviously dye sublimation images turn out a lot better than that pink Pepto-Bismol tablet dissolving into the surface of the card, but it's still, there's something about it. When you see a card come out of a CR805 with a pigment ink, reverse transfer, 600 dpi, it looks really crisp. It does a nice job. And it would be seen as the logical upgrade from the SD or SP series. So with that, let's go to a poll. Mark?
All righty here. Next poll. Does anybody have any personal experience with the CR805? Alrighty. Thank you guys for jumping on that quickly. 83% no experience with it. 8% we're still working on it, and another 8 we sent it back. Interesting. All right, Dave. There you go.
All right, thanks, Mark. So the CR805 came out a couple years ago, and like I said, it looked really promising. And I know we had one in our service bureau. Our tech guys are excited. Wow, look at the cards coming out of this thing. But when it was actually deployed in the field and being used to print cards every day, it came up with some problems, and some of them could be fixed and some of them sort of persist. So reverse transfer printers are kind of hard to get off the ground. And when manufacturers come out with them the first time, they can take a few years to get the bugs worked out. And so one school recently emailed us, they have CR805s. They said, well, actually, we're getting along with them okay, but here's what we have to do. We run the sticky card and it clears K2 every time. And then every time we change the ribbon, we run a sticky card and we do an alcohol cleaning. We have to fan the cards before we put them in the hopper always. And we never fill the hopper all the way up. We can only fill it about 1/3 of the way because weight matters for some reason. And then when filling the hopper, we tuck the card at the very bottom gently till it is flush and it grabs, because if you don't, that card and all the rest will jam. So just kind of a lot of maintenance. And so this particular customer kind of likened it to a pet. You know, it just takes a lot of work. It's doing all right, but there are some limitations, and it takes a lot of daily touches to make it work. Some other things about data cards. So they have introduced single wire connection between their software, True Credential, and their printers. Dual wire is what we're used to. That's one wire, USB wire, to carry the print data to the printer. And then if you're doing anything with encoding a contact chip or contactless chip, mostly contactless, then you needed a second USB wire. Data card has put all that over an Ethernet cable, and when it's working, it works great. But sometimes it doesn't work because networks are kind of funny, and they're still working some bugs out of True Credential too. So there's just a little bit of, you know, some things still getting worked out here. And you also, if you are encoding with that data card printer, they offer a lot of different encoders. You have to make sure you get the right encoder for your card and the right encoder supported by your software for the way you want to capture the numbers in your card. So you have to talk to your integrator, find out what they're supporting or whatever your software is, and make sure it's all lined up. Over at Transact, they have worked with data card to develop a particular encoder, and then they load their own credentials in that encoder in a way that makes it a Transact property, and nobody else can provide that. So if you're doing Transact data encoding in your printers, you're going to need to at least buy the encoder from Transact, if not the whole printer. So you know, they kind of took over that part of the process because there's more security that way. Entrust data card, you know, after you hear me talking kind of negatively, and I don't normally do that, it just kind of feels like they've lost their focus on their desktop product line. I went to their last summer. They won't do it this year, but last summer, I think it was the 50th anniversary of DataCard, and they had a great big meeting in Minnesota, partners from all around the world. It was pretty cool. They had a lot of great speakers, showed a lot of, factory tour, interesting, but they talked a lot about their investment in the banking sector, which is big. There's a lot of business there. They make this print thing here in front of you, which costs a lot of money. I mean, that thing right there with printing and coding, the fulfillment, putting it in envelopes, everything it does to cards there is something a bank would be really excited about having in their basement to print their financial cards. And they would spend a lot of money, millions possibly, on a system like that. DataCard seems to be paying a lot more attention to those kinds of products and services than to the desktop line. So it's just a feeling. Again, it's a color ID opinion. There's still a lot of good things going on at DataCard, but it sort of feels like they've taken their eye off of the higher ed ball a little bit. Meanwhile, over at HID, who bought Fargo years ago, they have been paying a lot of attention to printers. And this printer here in front of you, the DTC 4500E, this is it's comparable printer in some ways to the SB75, and it's direct to card. It laminates. It has a small footprint because the laminator and the flipper are on top. Everything goes up, and so that is really nice in a lot of card offices where you don't have a lot of real estate. It's been around for 7 years, but they keep updating it, and it's pretty quick and it's pretty quiet. So it has become a pretty popular printer. The 1500 was introduced not too long ago, and as you can look at it quickly, you'd say, well, didn't we just see that? And mostly you did. The laminator is the same laminator, but the printer below, it's a little less expensive, a few less features, but still very functional for what could be used in a card office. The DTC 5500 LMX, it was an interesting printer that HID introduced a few years ago. And the bubble there shows a DTC 550, which was a steel frame printer that card office people still think about with regret. They miss it. They love those printers. They just print it and print it and they print it. And then it went away after a while. So HID thought, well, let's do a throwback printer. Let's make a single chassis printer and kind of pattern it, a 21st century version of the DTC 550. And so this is the printer they came out with, and it has the laminator built in. It's all one piece. It has two-sided printing built in. You don't have to, you order this thing, you're ready to print and laminate on two sides of the card, mag encoding, everything. It's designed for high volume. It has ion technology for fast heat up. So when you go to laminate, you don't have to wait a long time for the laminator to warm up. It warms up in seconds, and it uses the wasteless lamb, linerless lamb that I described earlier when I was talking about lamination, and there's a roll of it there. So it has a lot of good features. We have a number of schools that love these, and we have a few schools that are kind of mixed reports on this, but overall it was a pretty innovative idea by HID. Let's put everything in one box. The HDP 5X, in other words, it was the 5000 and then it was the 5600. The 5000 was introduced a long time ago, and they have, I think they're on their 7th or 8th version of this printer. It has been a very successful reverse transfer printer. The first few years there were bumps, just like other companies that introduced reverse transfer printers, but they worked them out, and it has become a very solid reverse transfer printer. A few years ago, they introduced the 5600, which was an upgrade, essentially the same printer. They just upgraded the print head to 600 DPI from 300 DPI, but they just discontinued the 5600. Of course, it will be supported for a while, but you won't buy that anymore. So if you want this form factor in a printer, and this one, you see the printer on the right, flipper module in the middle, and the laminator on the left. You can, a couple screws, take each of those pieces off and move them around or reassemble them It's pretty slick system. The new printer that replaced the 5600 is the 6600. It just came out in late 2019, and it has a feature that's pretty cool that moves cards through a lot more quickly. It allows it to print and to do the retransfer process simultaneously. So one card is getting printed and then the film is being applied while the film is being applied to another card. So things that normally would have to be done in series are now being done in parallel. So it's speeded up the printing process itself. So it can now print along the lines of what we expect from direct-to-card printers, 230 cards per hour, and that's full color one side with transfer film. So, you know, and again, when somebody's telling you the number of cards per hour, the number of seconds per print, always be sure, find out what are they printing, you know, how many colors, is it one side, two side, all that stuff. It also has HID's new ion technology, so it heats up very rapidly, not 3 or 4 minutes. It has the wasteless lamb, just like the 5500 did. The image quality is excellent, and it is green circle certified. So very, very promising printer, just newly arrived on the market. If you are trying to do something with contactless cards in your printer, read them, encode them, whatever, here's a table that describes all the different card types and all the different readers, actually, well, 3 readers that are available for a variety of different printers. And you need to make sure that you get this all right. So if you're using the if you have an HID card, iClass SE, or CIOS, then this 5127 CK Mini will read it just fine. If you need to write to MyFair or DesFire, then you will need the iClass SE encoder if they're HID credentials, but if they're not HID credentials, then you need this Mini with support in the software. So it gets pretty complicated. You can look at this chart and think you understand it. You really need to talk to somebody who's been through the process and has done testing. And when it gets down to it, you should do testing yourself just to make sure everything is working the way you expect, because it's pretty easy to get this wrong and put the wrong encoder, read, write device in your printer. So there's a table and then there's experience, and you need to be using both. So I animated a bunch of stuff here that I didn't just show you, but moving along. Let's go to Zebra. Eltron kind of ruled the ID printer world at the turn of the millennium. And so, you know, in fact, if you go to the UK, they still talk about Eltrons when they're talking about ID printers. Eltron is the Kleenex of ID printers there. Zebra bought Eltron a long time ago, and so now they have introduced a lot of new printers. They introduced the ZXP line many years ago. The 7 is a direct-to-card. The 9 is reverse transfer. There was a ZXP8 that preceded the 9, and then ZC is the new line. So Zebra has essentially 3 kinds of printer right now. If you're looking to print large quantities, you like large hoppers, you need to laminate, then the ZXP7 is a printer you might want to look at. It does take up a lot of space on a countertop or a desk, but it is quick and it is reliable. And it also has the wasteless lamb that we talked about on the HID printer. So very, very good machine there. ZXP9 is the remake of the ZXP8, which is a reverse transfer printer. When the 8 first came out, just like all the other companies, it was a lot of trouble in the first few years. They worked most of that out, and then they introduced the 9. It has a pretty cool feature in that it prints in landscape mode. So the print head is wider than most other ID card printers. So it prints the short, prints across the short dimension of the card. So it's quicker. So it actually is pretty quick for a reverse transfer printer. And it also has the wasteless lamb, which is a nice feature. Contactless encoding is not well supported. You can order an encoder in this, but not too many software products have integrated the encoder in ZXP9s. If you have a software product that supports the ZXP9 and the encoder, then you're all set, but they're kind of few and far between. A printer from Zebra that is a new and shining star is the ZC350. These are small, quick, and very reliable. They do not have lamination. But if you need to print some cards in a hurry and not take up much space on a desktop, this is a very nice printer to do that with. Something that Zebra has done that is interesting that other manufacturers have dabbled in, but they seem to have really taken it seriously, is they've introduced a wide range of really unique ribbons. So up at the top, YMCKO, obviously yellow, magenta, cyan, and black, and then the O is the protection layer. But then you can get a half panel, full color on one side. You can get a half panel, both sides, full color, or let's see, full color on one side and then black on the back, both with an O panel. You can get a long-lasting panel, which is heavier than the O panel, provides more protection. It's less than a reverse transfer protection. It's less than an over laminate, but it's better than O. So you can pay a little more and get that LL. Pearlescent. So if you want a color with a little overlay of sheen to it, there's another one with the silver underneath the printing, so it kind of shines through. Resin black with an O panel, and then dye sub black as a black, because normally dye sub is done as YMC, so it's usually used a combination of 3 colors. Here it's a dye sub K, which is kind of unusual. And then the monochrome ribbon. So if you're only printing gold on black cards, there's a gold monochrome ribbon for you. And so it gives you a lot of options. They do some pretty cool stuff there. Let's talk a little bit more about reading and encoding after this poll.
Thank you, David. Next poll up. Do you read or encode contactless cards in your printers? What type of results we got? Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for voting. So 60% say yes. Okay, that's a lot of you. 27% no, and then 13%, we sure like to someday. We're tired of tapping cards. I think our Service Bureau folks would probably agree. They have to do that quite a bit sometimes too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. So a lot of you were already set up and doing this, reading and encoding cards, but if in case you're thinking about doing something different, and for those who are not doing it but may approach this someday, here are some things to keep in mind. The 3 software products that are, I mean, there are many of them, but the 3 that are leading in the university market for reading and encoding, Card Exchange, True Credential, AssureID. If you have one of the integrated versions of True Credential, then you're looking at your integrator as the interface, but underneath that is True Credential. Obviously, IDWorks can read using the right reader, but it's not so strong on encoding. The thing is that the software, as I showed in that table for the printers and the encoders, the software has to directly support the encoder and the printer. It has to be written to integrate with the drivers of both of those. So that needs to be done in advance. And the software companies have limited resources for custom work. They build their software, they start selling it, they start fixing the bugs, they get some custom work here and there. But if you're trying to get your software to do custom encoding, it's pretty challenging. You either have to pay a lot or wait a long time, or sometimes it doesn't happen. So that's kind of the problem. And so they try to work on the most likely printer and encoder combinations, so they at least cover the largest base that they think they will encounter. So if you're outside of that, it might in some cases be easier to change your hardware than to get a software company to include the hardware you wish they would. So just keep that in mind. Custom development is kind of a challenge. These are generally not big professional services company, but rather companies that build products, and then they want you to use them in the way that they built them to work. One thing that has been helpful over the years is RFIDs makes these keystroking readers, and so that provides, in some cases, an easier way. ID-Works we found was a really useful combination. RFIDs and ID-Works could capture pre-programmed card numbers, and it would keystroke into the software without too much trouble, sometimes without requiring much of an integration. So inline encoders that are available for the variety of printers, OmniKey, which is an HID company, but other companies build OmniKey readers into their printers, the 5121, and that's a contactless reader, usually used in contactless mode. The newer version, 5127, is available in 2 different configurations, and if you talk to some of the software companies, they'll go, oh, that 5127, that's kind of squirrely. And the problem there is because sometimes they're confused. If you get the encoder, which on that other chart I showed earlier is the CK Mini, that can be completely controlled by the software for encoding MyFair, DesFire, other kinds of custom program. But if you want to program HID data, like SIO data onto iClass SE or CIOS cards, then you need the programmer, and then you need HID software, usually AssureID, to run that. So, or Fargo Connect can also work through those. So again, if you're looking at an OmniKey encoder in your printer, make sure you get the right one, and talk to the people, study the tables, talk to the people who've been through this and figure it out. Dual-I makes dual and single wire boards, so that single wire in the data card printer that I talked about, that is the single cable that brings both the print data and the contact chip data, or contactless chip data in there. Identiv also, Elitech, and RFIDs all make encoders and readers that can go in printers. The way that the integrators approach this, I talked earlier about how Transact has a reader they'll put in the printer. It's part of their turnkey solution. You call Transact, you say, we want to encode, we want your solution for contactless cards, and they say, here it is. And so they will install, and they'll plug it in, and you play it. It runs. They use True Credential, they use data card printers, and they use a data card encoder provision with Transact credentials, and then those credentials will work on Transact readers because everything in their walled garden works with itself. Seaboard takes a little bit more of an open approach. Their integrations are with True Credential and with Fargo Connect, a couple different software products there to help with the printing. They prefer, what we've seen most of the time, is they capture the card serial number of the card, which we talked in depth about during the credential talk a couple weeks ago. Then they use that card serial number to look up the pre-programmed secret data in the database. So that's how they get around having to have the reader for each type of card and each type of programming, as they're just capturing the card serial number of whatever the chip is, and then the database is looking up whatever that secret data should be in the background. Atrium often brings card exchange software, which has very strong encoding and reading capabilities, and they sometimes will support the card serial number plus lookup, like Seaboard that I just described. TouchNet, their one card solution, supports DesFire encoding and reading, and as I can tell, they have a pretty good offering there, and you want to learn more about that, you'll have to talk to them, because they don't necessarily always call us up and say, oh, here's our latest thing. We learn when we talk to universities that we're working with, and we find out what's available. So we had a conversation recently with an Asian company that makes dot matrix printers, and they came out with a reverse transfer printer like the JVC printer, and they are introducing it to the North American market, and there's a problem. They don't put mag encoders in there. And I asked the rep, I said, mag encoders are kind of crucial, especially in the university market. They're still using a lot of mag stripes. He says, well, In Asia, they don't use mag stripes. They thought that was legacy technology. They don't see the point. And what I realized thinking it through is that Asia kind of went from, they didn't have the 20 years of magstripe financial card transactions that we've had here in North America. They didn't use cards nearly that much. And then when they finally did start doing electronic transactions, a lot of them kind of leapt to mobile and chip cards. And so they kind of skipped the magstripe era. Well, we have such a magstripe infrastructure that it's just part of our lives and will be for quite a while to come. But it's interesting how what we think of here in our region as this is probably what everybody's doing, and it's actually not the case. It's different. You go other places, they do different things, and it's kind of fun to get reminded of that sometimes. Okay, so all the other printers, I kind of lumped them because in the university market, there are not great numbers of printers outside the ones we just talked about, but they are out there. And a lot of schools have a printer that looks something like this. This is made by JVC, and it has been for a long time. It's a reverse transfer printer. It's solid, and it has been offered by, it is now owned by Kanematsu, which is the parent company of NISCA. They just recently bought this JVC printer, but this thing has been sold all around the world with different labels on it. You can see right here in the pictures, the one on the left has a data card label, the one in the middle has a MAGICARD label, and the one on the right is the new NISCA product. This also is sold by MAGICA, and if you were in Eastern Europe, you'd see Cyrillic characters on the brand. So this thing is out there. It's been solid and it's been around for a long time. Another EVOLIS has sold, they say that they have sold more printers than anybody around the world. A lot of them have been the less expensive models that, single and dual side printers just to crank out IDs for businesses and whatever. But they're solid, they make good printers. They recently introduced the Avancia, which is a reverse transfer printer made by Canon, who also sells it under their own brand. So Canon, jumping out of the multi-function device, has added a reverse transfer ID card printer. IDP is a company from Korea that is making some inroads in North America. They have a whole line of smart printers. The Smart 70 is kind of the flagship. It's a modular printer and looks kind of like something you'd take to the beach. It's kind of innovative, different look there. And MAGICARD, based in the UK, many of their printers, if not all of them, are made in the UK. They've been really solid and have been a mainstay of access control dealers here in the United States for a long time. They just introduced their latest entry in the reverse transfer printer line. They introduced one a few years ago, same story, came out, didn't do all that well, went back, came back out with the Ultima. This one we're waiting to hear. It's pretty new, so we don't know much about it, but MAGICARD has been a solid printer line over the years. And moving beyond desktop ID printers, Zebra introduced a large format printer which prints cards 5.5 by 3.5 inches, so much larger than a CR80 card. And the goal here is to print conference badges, event credentials, things people wear around their necks and can be seen from a distance, and they need to be bigger than CR80 cards, which kind of dangle a little loosely from the end of a nice lanyard. So when we go to stadiums again, there will be people wearing conference credentials or event credentials, and many of them will be printed on these Zebra large format printers. They do a very nice job. They're quick. They crank out nearly 200 cards per hour, single side in that large format. Direct to card, just like the ID card printers, but very solid. You can put it in a bag, carry it around, print a bunch of credentials, bring it back home, and it still works. The NISCA SWIFTCOLor is a really remarkable printer. It's quite large. It is 2 or 3 times the size of the regular desktop printers we've been talking about. It uses inkjet, and it is blindingly fast. After years of watching ID cards going into a printer, and even in a pretty quick printer, it takes, I don't know, 20 seconds. You hear the different passes of each color, and then 20 seconds later, the card comes out the other end, and you go, oh, that was pretty quick. This thing you put in any size format. I mean, it is quite large. I forget what the maximum size is on this thing of card, and it will just crank them out like one a second. I mean, it's just amazing to watch after being in the ID card business for so long. Couple problems though. It's inkjet, so it's spraying the color on there, and it does a really nice job of it mostly, but the cards have to be printed with a pre-coating so that the inkjet sticks to the surface of the card. The ink for this particular printer needs something to help it adhere to the surface of plastic. So that's one thing. Cards have a little bit of a funny rubbery feel to them. It's getting better. It's not as light like it used to be. But then the bigger problem is it's very fragile. And if you move it, sometimes the ink tanks because it actually has liquid ink that it's spraying on the cards. If they get a bubble in them or if something happens, then it doesn't work right. And sometimes if you have a card with a lot of color, a lot of saturation, again, it just can have trouble. So we love this printer, but we've also had a number of them returned. So we're looking at this going, man, this is like the coolest tech. If they could just work the bugs out of it, it would be something I think a lot of people would be interested in. In the meantime, it's a novelty, and we're talking about what's cool and what's available. It's out there, and if you go to a trade show, go ask somebody to throw some cards in this thing and watch them fly out. It's pretty surprising. So recap, some reminders what we talked about. Entrust data card, we're wondering at Color ID, we're just kind of wondering, are they losing a little focus on their desktop line, on the software and hardware? Maybe not, maybe it's just a little shift of focus and they'll be back, but anyway, that's our opinion of what's going on there. HID Fargo is very focused on printers. They have not let up on their printer business, even while HID has been busy developing mobile and cards and locks and everything else that ASSA ABLOY does in their whole world. The Fargo line has stayed very focused on product. Zebra has been making the new ZC series line is very good. We understand that when Zebra bought Motorola Communications, that some of those folks came over and helped develop that, and it seems like there's some new blood there, and that's a good sign. NISCA has acquired JVC. We'll see what goes on there. NISCA has introduced some newer products over the years, and always has been a solid printer. EVOLIS has that international focus, and they're still trying to gain a toehold in some markets in North America, but in other markets they're doing very nicely. And MAGICARD has just been kind of quiet lately. Like even as I'm talking about their new reverse transfer printer, the fact that nobody's been in my ear telling me about that every day. Hey, we got a new printer. Here's what you need to know about it, is an indication that perhaps they're looking for markets somewhere else right now. So which happens, markets move around the globe. As far as encoding goes, every printer we've talked about today is available with a MagStripe encoder, and they are supported by Windows, and it just seems to be one of those things that works most of the time, if not always. But if you're trying to do something with a contactless chip, getting the right reader encoder requires more attention to detail than ever. You need to really get things lined up there correctly, including a confirmation from the software developer or integration partner on the right model for your printer. In the future, for ID printers, we think that incremental improvements will continue. I mean, things keep getting better, bugs keep getting worked out, new models the bugs get shaken off of them and they go forward and start to shine. Reverse transfer is becoming more widely offered. More manufacturers are offering reverse transfer, and they are becoming more successful. But because it's more expensive and it takes a little longer in a lot of cases, it will never completely replace direct to card. There will always be a place for both as long as we're printing cards. Laser units, I didn't talk about those today, but they are available. The only problem is they're very expensive, and they can do really cool stuff, and both with causing the surface of the card to raise when it's heated, to putting ghost images into the surface of the card. So maybe those will become more affordable at some time and become part of our printing process, but it's not happening right now. encoding support will continue to improve. I'm sure of that. And as far as the future, we're watching that SWIFTCOLOR inkjet. Maybe there's something there for the future just because it is so impressive when it's working right. So with all of that, I'm done telling you all I know about printers. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Dave, we got a couple of questions that came in throughout the presentation. I'll just start at the beginning. Okay, what exactly is the heat difference between direct-to-card and reverse transfer? Does one or the other potentially cause card bowing warping?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did mention that reverse transfer, in direct-to-card, the print head goes across the surface of the card for each panel printed. So YMCKO, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 passes, and each one is a brief pass across the surface of the card so the heat doesn't build up too much. When you apply the transfer film to the surface of the card, it requires a higher heat and more pressure. And so the surface of the card is subjected to more heat and more pressure, and it can cause the cards to bow. Especially if you're only printing on one side, it's not unusual to see a not properly set up printer produce a bunch of potato chips effectively. So, some of the printers have anti-bowing devices that kind of bend them backwards the other way. Some you can help prevent that by adjusting the heat, maybe turn it down a little bit. Certainly, if you are using a reverse transfer printer, we highly recommend that you get composite cards so that they have a layer or 2 layers of polyethylene in there, something besides just PVC. And by putting those extra layers of other material in there, it helps that card stay straighter when it's printed.
Very good. Next up, can I use tactile die when I have a contactless smart card?
That's a good question. Mark, do you know the data card position on that?
Yes. Why yes, I do. So in my previous life of being the in my previous life of product managing for Interest Data Card, we did a number of these projects. So the quick answer is yes, you can absolutely have a tactile die and having a contactless smart card. The thing that we need to work with you on is simply identify, the inlay that is being used for your unique card. So once we have the inlay is the actual antenna and the chip positioning on your card. So once we have that dialed in, then we can relegate where your die can be placed and pressed into the card plastic. And then secondly, we can identify how large of a die you can get because they offer several different diameter dies. More times than not, the safe spot is going to be directly dead center in the card. So, if you have a single technology contactless card, Prox, iClass, MyFair, Desfire, usually you can put it right in the middle. When you get into dual contactless chip cards, that's when it gets a little sketchy because, some of the inlays are going to be like a quarter and that'll get placed right in the middle of the card. And then you have a rectangle inlay on the outside. So long story short, it's definitely possible, but we definitely want to walk you through the process and go through all that. So let's see here. Next up, I have seen some printers that offer a Wi-Fi adapter for communication. Is that something I should consider?
Sure. I mean, you're going to communicate with that printer somehow. So if it's supported, you need a way to broadcast from the PC that has the software. And then it's going to send the data to the Wi-Fi adapter, which is a little network server on the printer itself to intercept, to catch that signal. That can be done. We don't have a lot of requests for that. So I don't have a lot of experience in that area, but we can follow up and put you in touch with somebody if you are seriously considering that. We have folks at Color ID that are network experts regarding printers, and I'm sure they have some experience in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard both sides. You know, some folks, you know, really do like that option, and some, you know, probably like in my boat, you know, don't, just because if it's anything like my network at home right now, there's good days and there's bad days, and when there's bad days, it's really frustrating whenever, you know, you submit a print job over to the HP, you know, printer, and then you walk over there and it's nowhere to be found. So anyway, let's see here. Next question. How long do the event badges last for some of those large format printers?
Well, the direct-to-card printer from Zebra, I mean, that's just like your ID cards. It's a direct-to-card print. And so that's, you know, unless you leave it lying out in the sun every single day for 12 hours, you know, those are going to last a long time. I mean, generally, event badges tend to be, you know, credentials like that tend to be much more limited time use, but those would last a long time. The SWIFTCOLOR badges, I almost hesitate to talk about how long they could last, because just getting them out of the printer correctly is such a challenge. But the surface is not incredibly durable on those. So you know, if you're looking at that, but the ZC the ZC printer from Zebra in the large format, that, you know, those will. It doesn't have a laminating option, but again, if you're not wearing it out in the sun hours every single day, those will last a long time.
Definitely, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we're just a couple of minutes over the allocated time, so great questions, everybody. Thank you all for participating today. Just a quick reminder that once the 5-part series concludes, we are going to provide a copy of the presentation with the surveys to you all. And don't miss out on the next webinar. That's next Tuesday, Making and Managing Campus Credentials. It does require its own registration, so please register if you haven't already done so. So with that being said, on behalf of Danny, David, and myself, thank you guys for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.